A nossa primeira palestra tem o tema O desenvolvimento do hidrogênio de baixo carbono no Reino Unido. Nossa palestrante será Caroline Berli.
Hi everyone, my name is Caroline Burley. I work for the UK's Department for International Trade. I sit within the hydrogen and carbon capture sector team. So I support investors from overseas to invest in UK projects and supply chain. And I also support, of course, UK companies to export their goods and services overseas to markets such as Brazil. Now I will start sharing my screen to share my slide deck. So the theme of my presentation today is on the UK's deployment of low carbon hydrogen. So that includes the strategy and regulatory framework behind this deployment. It includes the supply chain, of course, which supports the deployment of projects across the UK. And we will then end with a look at the project landscape in the UK. So kind of see the pipeline of projects that is being supported by the strategy, the policy, and the supply chain. Now, a quick overview of why the UK is such an attractive environment to deploy low carbon hydrogen. We have an ambition of up to 10 gigawatt of low carbon hydrogen by 2030, at least half of which should be from green hydrogen. We then have several financial mechanisms that will support this deployment of new projects, including the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund and the £100 million hydrogen business model as well. We also have £12 billion of capital available from the UK Infrastructure Bank, and hydrogen is one of their top priorities within the whole clean growth sphere. And worry not, because I will delve deeper into these mechanisms of the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund and the business model in further slides, so you can really get the detail of these mechanisms. And if we look at the ambition of 10 gigawatt, this is supported by an actual pipeline of 20 gigawatt of potential low carbon hydrogen projects through to 2037. Some other noteworthy stats that I should mention is a robust regulatory environment in the form of a new low carbon hydrogen standard, which defines exactly what it means for hydrogen to be low carbon. The UK is also naturally endowed with natural assets that can support the rollout of the low carbon hydrogen industry, and also expertise which has been built over decades of a very successful offshore oil and gas industry. So this includes salt caverns and depleted oil and gas fields, which can be used for hydrogen and also CO2 storage. And we also have a vast pipeline infrastructure for natural gas, which can be redeployed and used towards hydrogen. Then if we look at the projects that are actually under development of these 20 gigawatt through to 2037, we have over a dozen large-scale hydrogen projects ongoing or pending, including the Blue Hydrogen Project Acorn in the northeast of Scotland, Project Gigastack, which involves a refinery and green hydrogen being produced on site to decarbonize operations, and also H21, which is a more hydrogen distribution focused project in the north of England. And also this dozen of large-scale projects includes 2 CCUS clusters, which are already under development. The UK is a global player and consistently ranks in the top 10 globally for hydrogen technology patent rates. So it is also an environment which is rife with innovation in that space. Moving on to the UK Hydrogen Strategy, which was published in August last year, so nearly a year ago. This strategy is an extension of the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. And this 10-point plan outlines the UK's ambitions across 10 different technologies for decarbonisation of the country and how we will work towards achieving net zero by 2050, which is actually outlined as a law in the UK. The UK Hydrogen Strategy now sets out a regulatory framework of how we will deliver on what was initially a 5 gigawatt ambition for the installation of low carbon hydrogen capacity by 2030. This ambition in the meantime has been updated to 10 gigawatts, and this is something that I will delve into in subsequent slides. As you see, it is barred here. Some of the different components of the UK Hydrogen Strategy that I would like to highlight are, first of all, the twin track approach. that the UK is adopting, which means that we will be supporting multiple technologies for hydrogen production, including green, or also electrolytic hydrogen, as we call it, and blue or carbon capture enabled hydrogen production. So we will not discriminate between different technologies as long as they can be classified as low carbon according to the UK standard. The UK's hydrogen strategy also launched a set of consultations where industry stakeholders and also academia could feed in their expert views on, first of all, the design of the £240 million net zero hydrogen fund. Second of all, the design of the UK's hydrogen business model, which is designed after the contracts for difference, which are quite prominent in our offshore wind sector. And the third element that was consulted on with industry was the design of the UK standard for low carbon hydrogen, which all applicants for funding must adhere by. These consultations were open for a number of months and then closed in October last year. And then our Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy collected and collated all the views and evaluated them carefully to then publish a response and further detail, which I will outline in subsequent slides. Another element of the UK hydrogen strategy is that our Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, or BEIS for short, is working with industry to assess the safety, technical feasibility, and also the cost effectiveness of blending up to 20% of hydrogen into the existing UK gas network. And doing so could deliver a 7% emissions reduction on natural gas in total, and the decision on this will be made next year at some point. BEIS has also recently launched a hydrogen sector development action plan, which will set out how the government will support companies to secure supply chain opportunities and also skills and jobs in the transition towards low carbon hydrogen. Next, I mentioned I would provide further detail on the different funding mechanisms available for low carbon hydrogen projects. The first one mentioned is the £240 million net zero hydrogen fund, which will be delivered between 2022 this year and 2025 to support new low carbon hydrogen production projects across the UK. So we'll use grants to de-risk projects and also unlock private capital in the process. And as I mentioned, there was a consultation on this last year from August to October, and BEIS have recently published their responses to the different input that they've received from stakeholders across industry and academia. Their response was that they have decided to split the Net Zero Hydrogen Fund into 4 different strands to align with different business model and also carbon capture regulation timelines. So that includes the first strand, which will provide development expenditure grant funding to support FEED studies. We also have the second strand, which will provide capital expenditure grant funding for projects that do not require additional hydrogen business model support. And I should mention that the acronym here, IDHRS, stands for Industrial Decarbonization and Hydrogen Revenue Support. It is a synonym of the hydrogen business model. The department thinks that these projects will be mostly hydrogen mobility focused projects, so projects that can apply for other funding available to hydrogen refueling stations in particular. The third strand will provide CapEx grant funding for non-CCUS projects. In essence, this will be green hydrogen projects seeking revenue through the hydrogen business model as well. And the fourth strand will be catering towards CapEx grant funding for CCUS-enabled projects that are also seeking additional support through the hydrogen business model. So the first 2 strands for DevEx support and CapEx without the business model support have already closed their applications, and strands 3 and 4 recently opened for application. Now, moving on to the second vital funding mechanism that BEIS has put in place, which is the hydrogen business model. And this is more focused on providing subsidies or revenue support to low carbon hydrogen producers that are eligible. The hydrogen business model is a private contract, and the funding is determined through looking at the difference between what we call the strike price, which is the actual production price for low carbon hydrogen producers, and then the reference price, which is the price at which these producers are actually able to sell their low carbon hydrogen in the market. And the reference price will include a mechanism which we call a price floor, and this will be based on the natural gas price, as we do not yet have a national, let alone international benchmark for low carbon hydrogen pricing. So the low carbon hydrogen business model is designed to reduce over time, so we can really maximize the value that we get for UK taxpayers. And first contracts will be allocated from 2023 onwards. The idea is to support up to 1 gigawatt of electrolytic hydrogen projects to be in operation or construction via 2 allocation rounds, both next year and in 2024. Now, also a few words on our low carbon hydrogen standard, and this is essential because any project or producers applying for either net zero hydrogen funding, the hydrogen business model support, or both need to adhere to the low carbon hydrogen standard with the hydrogen that they will be producing. So this standard sets out in detail the methodology that producers can use to calculate the emissions associated with the hydrogen they produce. So the guidelines are that the hydrogen produced must meet a GHG emissions intensity of 20 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per MJ/LHV or less. And this is very much in line with the standard put in place by our EU neighbors. The greenhouse gas emissions must be calculated at the point of production, and producers must also set out a risk mitigation plan for fugitive hydrogen emissions, as research has found that these can be even more harmful than methane emissions. Now, as part of the regulatory framework, I would also like to say a few words about the British Energy Security Strategy, which was published in April this year in light of the current geopolitical climate and a lot of nations across the globe realizing that it is more important than ever to have to be energy autonomous to a certain level. One of the key elements of the British Energy Security Strategy, as far as hydrogen goes, is the doubling of our ambition, which was initially outlined as 5 gigawatts by 2030 in the hydrogen strategy. This has been doubled to up to 10 gigawatt of low carbon hydrogen production capacity by 2030. And at least half of this, as I mentioned previously, should be from electrolytic hydrogen. The UK is also aiming to run annual allocation rounds for electrolytic hydrogen, moving to price competitive allocation by 2025. So the different subsidies, well, specifically the hydrogen business model, is meant to reduce over time. And this is meant to support up to 1 gigawatt of electrolytic hydrogen in construction or operational by 2025. Another very important element as an add-on to the current business model, which only focuses on hydrogen production, on the upstream element of things, is the designing of new business models which will support hydrogen transport and storage infrastructure by 2025. And this will be essential to grow the hydrogen economy as a whole, as we cannot only have production, we also need places to store the hydrogen, systems to distribute it through, and also end users to offtake. One of the final commitments I'd like to highlight of the British Energy Security Strategy is the setting up of a hydrogen certification scheme by 2025. And this will be an internationally focused add-on to the national hydrogen standard, which we just saw on the previous slide. And this will demonstrate high-grade British hydrogen for export and also ensure that any hydrogen that we might import in the future meets the same standards that British hydrogen producers are expected to adhere by. Moving on to the UK's hydrogen supply chain and how it can support both the deployment of low carbon hydrogen in the UK and also across the globe in different markets. The UK has capability across the hydrogen value chain, from upstream blue and green hydrogen production technologies and expertise in EPC to storage and distribution technologies and solutions, and also various applications and fuel cell manufacturing. Now, if we look at the different segments of the supply chain, first we'll delve into blue hydrogen, and we distinguish between the manufacturers, so the manufacturers of original equipment, such as steam reformers and also carbon capture solutions. And then on the other side, we have the developers, EPCs, and consultancies. So I will not read all the companies in these lists, as my colleagues will share the slides with you afterwards, and you can click your way through the individual links that I have left for you here. But Some of the generation technologies providers we have are Johnson Matthey with the LCH technology, for instance, and Wood with their proprietary terrace wall technology. We have excellent carbon capture solutions providers, Carbon Clean and TP Group. On the developers consultancy side, we have Arup and BP, and also the likes of Petrofac, Storegga in Scotland, and Environmental Resources Management. Now, if we move on to green hydrogen production, again, on the manufacturer's side, that would include the manufacturers of entire electrolyzer systems. And on that side, we have CPH2, providing membrane-free electrolyzers, and then ITM Power, providing PEM electrolyzers. We also have manufacturers of vital components of these electrolyzers, so such as catalyst-coated membranes and anionic exchange membranes, and also compression solutions that feed into these electrolyzer systems. On the developers and consultancy side, you can see some of the company names recurring from the previous blue hydrogen slide. This is because some of the companies choose to adopt a true twin track approach, which is very much in line with our hydrogen strategy, and that would include the likes of Arup, BP, and Environmental Resources Management. But we also have companies who decide to specialize solely in green hydrogen production and development, and that would be the likes of Protium, and apologies, my slide just skipped, the likes of Protium and Octopus Hydrogen. Now, if we move on to the midstream segment, to storage, we have providers of storage solutions, including Chesterfield Special Cylinders. As the name reveals, they provide overground storage, and also Luxfer gas cylinders. We also have the likes of H2Go, which is an innovative startup in the hydrogen storage space. We have solutions integrators, including BOC and Innovin, and we also have consultancies specializing specifically in hydrogen storage, such as ERCE and Hydronor. And I mentioned in the very beginning that the UK is naturally endowed with subsurface options in addition to these overground cylinders that can be used for hydrogen storage that include salt caverns and depleted oil and gas fields. And the British Geological Survey suggests that we have significant rock salt formations with the potential for thousands of terawatt hours of future storage. So there is great potential there. Moving on to distribution, in the midstream segment, we have hydrogen refueling station operators such as ITM Motive, which is a subsidiary of ITM Power, which manufactures electrolyzers. They've also ventured out into the refueling space. We have Octopus Hydrogen providing what they call hydrogen as a service, and that means the full suite from green hydrogen production to the distribution and refueling. So it's kind of like a no-fuss solution. On the component side, we have manufacturers of hydrogen hoses, piping, compressors, and valves that are essential components of these refueling stations. We also have engineering consultancies and developers with expertise in the hydrogen distribution and refueling space. And we have hydrogen refueling solutions providers such as Haskell Fuel Cell Systems and NanoSun. Now, the final segment of the supply chain that we will delve into is, of course, downstream applications. And at the heart of any downstream application of hydrogen, we have the manufacturing of fuel cells. We have several manufacturers in the UK, ranging from Adelan, manufacturing microtubular solid oxide fuel cells, to Ceres Power, manufacturing solid oxide fuel cells, and also Intelligent Energy, manufacturing PEM fuel cells. We have integration and fuel cell systems engineers, including Fuel Cell Systems, which you saw on the previous slide, for distribution. And we also have manufacturers of, again, my slide skipped, apologies, manufacturers of components that go into these fuel cells, such as catalysts, membranes, and coatings. If we look into the different applications of the fuel cells and hydrogen, we have heat and power generation on one side. So we have Baxi and Oyster Bosch manufacturing hydrogen boilers, which could be quite revolutionary when it comes to the decarbonization of industrial players. We also have engineering consultancies specializing in hydrogen usage and heat and power, including Arup and Clark Energy. On the mobility side, we have road and rail transport solutions being manufactured across the UK, including River Simple manufacturing hydrogen passenger cars. We have Wrightbus, as the name reveals, manufacturing hydrogen-powered buses, and then Alstom and Viva Rail on the hydrogen-powered rail side. In the construction equipment segment, we have JCB, which in 2020 launched its first prototype of a hydrogen-powered excavator, which could be a major breakthrough in decarbonizing construction operations. And again, we have consultancies that specialize in hydrogen mobility, including Arup and Element Energy. And on the aviation side, not to forget, we have Zero Avia, which in September 2020 launched its first hydrogen-fueled flight. So this was a small plane with up to 6 seats, I believe, but it's very exciting development when it comes to the decarbonization of aviation and airlines. Now, to end this presentation, we'll have a look at the UK's hydrogen project landscape. So you can see that the projects are spread out across the UK, from the south of England to the northernmost tip of Scotland. And also you have some projects in Northern Ireland and a few in Wales as well. And if you look at the color code on the right-hand side, you can see that the projects are will be both green electrolytic and CCUS-enabled blue hydrogen projects. And there are also some storage and distribution projects in the mix. And in the very beginning, we saw a number of up to 20 gigawatt of hydrogen projects being in the pipeline up to 2037. And you can see here a bit more of a visual overview of that. We have nearly 60 projects in planning or announced in planning or under development at the moment. Now, if we look at the CCUS opportunity more specifically, this would be delving into the blue dots that you saw on the previous map. So the 10-point plan, which I mentioned on the hydrogen strategy slide, established a commitment to deploy carbon capture in 2 industrial clusters by the mid-2020s, so by roughly 2025, and a further 2 clusters by the end of the decade to create what we call industrial super places in the UK. So these will be kind of blue hydrogen-enabled clusters, which are distributing this low-carbon hydrogen to the different industrial players and manufacturers around that production site in the effort to decarbonize the entire industrial cluster. And our net zero strategy sets an ambition to capture 20 to 30 million tons of carbon dioxide per year by 2030, and the super places play a major role in that. There's also substantial CO2 storage potential and industrial infrastructure in these different super places, including a vast gas network that can be repurposed. I should also mention that the carbon capture cluster sequencing process launched in May last year. And this was followed by the announcement of the Track 1 clusters and an additional reserve cluster in October 2021. So what that means is that we will prioritize 2 clusters by the middle of the decade. And that would be what you see here on the map, Teesside and Humberside, forming 1 cluster, which will be labeled as the East Coast cluster. And then in the northwest of England, we have, here it is labeled as Merseyside, the HyNet cluster. So these will be the 2 priority clusters for the middle of the decade. And then we have what we call the reserve cluster in the northeast of Scotland, here labeled as Grangemouth. And these were announced in October 2021. This is supported by the £1 billion CCS Infrastructure Fund, which will provide CapEx expenditure support on transport and storage networks and these industrial carbon capture projects to facilitate this decarbonization ambition. Now, I have arrived at the end of my allotted time and presentation. I hope this was informative for you. Thank you very much for your attention. And I very much regret that I wasn't able to join live. So I won't be here to answer questions as you type them in live, but my colleagues will make a note of these and send them to me, and I will make every effort to get back to you in writing or potentially schedule a meeting depending on how in-depth your questions are. Thank you very much.